Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. All right, good. Pavlov thing. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Canada with IFS. Last year, IFSCA presented at the Bremen Ontario Network's opening plenary on IFS and grief. Okay, so this year we're presenting in Victoria, BC on IFS for a weekend. We've worked with the Winnipeg Marriage and Family Therapist Program. We teach regularly at the University of Western Ontario. There's a couples workshop with Dr. Jennifer Fleming in September, that's in your packages. There's a grief workshop in the late fall in Toronto. For the third year in Toronto, we've got the Skills and Competencies course, which begins next month. I was invited by some people in New Brunswick. Let's hear it for New Brunswick. Yay! To come and work with their staff, to bring that course to their staff. So it hadn't occurred to me before, but that course in Skills and Competencies is portable. So that may also be moving across the country a bit. That'd be great. There's also online courses available, and there's an online consult group available. So a lot of people these days are working with parts. So it's helpful to be able to work with a group where you can just, have someone helping you out with what you're doing, because it can be a little more complex than it looks. The reason all that's going on in Canada and the reason that IFSCA is working so hard is because 11 years ago I went to a retreat in Mexico, heard about this thing called IFS, this guy called Dick Schwartz, sounded interesting, I had a background in gestalt. I thought, let's see what this guy's doing. Went down and met this man, and about halfway through the week said, you figured it out, didn't you? And at the time, I think he had a shy part that came up. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, you figured out the personality system. He said, yeah, I kind of did. I said, you bastard, I wanted to be that guy. So I've been looking for all the flaws for 11 years in his model where I can say, it doesn't work. And damn it, that skeptical part of me can't find them. So I'm delighted to invite you to welcome Dick Schwartz today, and I hope that you take some of the inspiration away with you that I took away 11 years ago, which just has transformed my work, my relationships, my understanding of myself, my understanding of people, and my capacity to be more of who I want to be, frankly. So please join me in welcoming Dick Schwartz.
Hi. So it's great to be back in Toronto, and I am so grateful to Derek for all he's doing up here, as you heard. I thought it was longer than 11 years ago, but I guess that's right. We ran into each other. And he wanted me to talk about trauma in couples, which is a lot in one day. So we're going to have to move pretty fast. Although being in a couple is traumatic, generally. So we can kind of combine them. So how many of you know something about IFS already? Raise your hand. So for how many of you is this quite new? Okay, wow, okay. So I'm going to condense an intro that I typically do in about 3 hours to about 15 minutes. And then I think I'll show some video, and depending on the timing, I've got a video of a couple maybe for this afternoon. Could also, if there is a couple who wants to take a chance and do a demo here, so if there's somebody up for that. So that's what I have in mind. I'm open to persuasion if you have other ideas. But just to jump in, so as Derek said, about 30 some years ago, I'm pretty old, I figured this out. I'm trained as a family therapist, and I was trying to prove that family therapy was the way, and my clients weren't cooperating in an outcome study I was doing that was supposed to prove this. I didn't realize they'd been cured when we reorganized the families. And they kept binging and purging. There was a bulimic population, and out of frustration, I began asking why, and they started talking about these parts. And they would talk about a part that was critical of them whenever anything happened that was negative in their life, and then another part that would come up in response to that that felt totally worthless and empty and alone. And then to the rescue would come the binge to take them away from that feeling. But the act of the binge would bring the critic back. And to me as a family therapist, this sounded familiar. It sounded like these sequences that I would be tracking and observing in families. So I got intrigued and began trying to apply some of the family stuff to this inner system. And because I, back then, was thinking about these things the way the field still does, unfortunately, which is the critic is a kind of internalized parental voice, and the binge is some kind of out-of-control impulse, I was trying to get my client to stand up to the critic and to control the binge. And so I would give homework assignments to that effect, and my clients were coming back saying, not only did that not work, it's getting worse. But I was like that man in a hole with a shovel. So I'd say, do more, stand up stronger, control more. And it would get worse and worse until the first client I was aware of that had an extensive sex abuse history and also cut herself on her wrist. And by then I'd heard about this gestalt empty chair technique. Do you know about this? Where you have a client in one chair and an empty chair across from them, and you have them imagine that that part of them is sitting in that chair and having a conversation, and then you have them be the part talking back to them. And I was hearing about 4 and 5 parts, so I've got a room full of chairs, and my clients are hopping all over, until one guy said, I don't really have to move around to do this, I can just sit here. So ever since then, people just sit there. So I've got the cutting part, and one session I decide we're not going to let her leave until it agrees to not cut her, and of course, after a couple hours of badgering it, it finally agrees not to. I open the door to the next session, it's got a big gash down the side of her face. And I collapsed emotionally, and I just said, I give up, I can't beat you at this. And the part said, I don't really want to beat you. And that was an historic moment in the development of this, because I shifted out of that coercive place to just being curious. So why do you do this to her? And the part proceeded to talk about how when she was being abused, it needed to get her out of her body, and it needed to contain the rage that would get her more abuse. And so I shifted once more. Now I'm not just curious, but I have a kind of abiding appreciation for the heroic role it played in her life. And I tell that to the part, and the part bursts into tears, because everyone had demonized it and tried to get rid of it. And talk more about why it still needed to do this, because the anger was still there, and it talked about parts that were very vulnerable that it had to protect, and other things. But as it talked, it sounded like it was still stuck back in that time, like it was living as if she was still 5 years old and in jeopardy all the time. And as I heard all that, I began to think, maybe these parts aren't what they seem. Maybe they're like kids in a family. Family therapy's big insight was you can't take a kid out of a family system and expect the kid to change by telling them to cut it out. You've got to work with a network of relationships that are driving his behavior. Maybe the same thing is true, and it turns out to be true. That parts are not what they seem. In fact, the position I've come to over all these years is that we're all multiple personalities. People who carry that diagnosis of DID aren't any different from anybody in this room. Their alters are what I call parts. Only their system got fully blown apart by the horrific abuse they suffered. So there are these amnesic barriers, and parts take over and others run. But that's who we are. The nature of the mind is to be multiple that way. That's a kind of radical position, hopefully becoming less radical. And that's a good thing, because all of these parts are wonderful, valuable resources to us in their non-burdened, in their natural states. Why would we have them if they weren't valuable to us? But they're forced out of their valuable states into roles that can be extreme, can be damaging, by events in our lives and the burdens they accrue from those events. So this concept of burden is very important. Parts pick up extreme beliefs and emotions from traumas, from attachment injuries that entered our system and then attach to them almost like a virus and drive the way they operate thereafter. And our field has confused the parts with the burdens they carry. So the closest thing in traditional psychotherapy, this would be an introject. It came into your system, but it isn't just a parental voice, it's a part that's carrying that parental voice. And sometimes using it, sometimes stuck with it, but it drives the way it criticizes you, for example. And if the part unburdens, releases that, it immediately transforms into its natural, valuable state, like magic. It's like a curse has been lifted. Hard to believe. Those of you who've been fooling with this know that what I'm saying is true. Okay, so nothing but good parts. I'm sort of the Will Rogers of the phenomenon. I never met a part that ultimately I didn't like. And I've worked with people who've murdered people, people who've sexually abused little kids, and even those parts, when approached with curiosity, respect, will give their secret histories of how they got forced into these roles, how much they hate what they're doing, how much they carry the burden of their perpetrator's energy that drives them to perpetrate. No bad parts. Nobody to fight with. But all of us and our clients are constantly fighting with the ones that interfere in our lives. And the fighting makes them bigger and stronger and more extreme. Okay, so that's the first concept. There aren't any bad ones. Now, if that isn't hard enough to believe, this next one is even harder for most people. And I stumbled onto it simply because I, again, was applying family stuff to this inner system. And once I got hip to the fact that parts aren't what they seem, and I was trying to get my client to listen to them and get along with them, so I would set up dialogues. Again, initially the open chair thing, but then just sitting in place. And as I was trying to get my client to listen to maybe the critic, some part that hated the critic started to come in and my client would get angry. And as a family therapist, we learned whenever you're having two people talk and a third person interferes, ask that one to just step out. So I began asking parts to step out when they would come in and interfere in these dialogues. You following this? And clients could do that. I would say, okay, ask the one who's so angry at the critic to just step back. So, okay, it did. Now how do you feel toward the critic? And it'd be entirely different. Often in the direction of, I'm just curious about why it calls me names. Even sometimes, I feel sorry for it that it has to do this all day. Seconds earlier, hated it. The mere act of getting that hating part to separate released somebody else inside. And that person had these wonderful, curious, compassionate qualities. And I would do it on another client, and the same person popped out. And not only was curious and calm and compassionate, confident, but also had a kind of wisdom about how to relate to the parts in a way that they would relax and feel heard and begin to change. And sometimes that self, I came to call it, would take over sessions, and I would just get out of the way. And 30 minutes later, wow, that was amazing. So I call that the self because when I got people there and asked, what part of you is that? They'd said, that's not a part. That's more me. That's myself. We call that a self with a capital S to distinguish it from the ordinary use of the word self, which means the whole person, as this special kind of essence that it turns out is in everybody, cannot be damaged, knows how to heal. That one's really hard to believe. And the only reason I believe it is because I've been doing this for 35 years. And I've yet to have a client where we couldn't get that person to pop out and take over a session. And again, I've specialized for 20 years in the treatment of severe, chronic, horrible abuse. Lots of cult survivors, lots of clients with that diagnosis of MPD or DID. And I'm here to tell you, when certain parts step back, the same self pops out. So that's become the centerpiece of the model, this idea that self is in there and how to get self into the lead, both internally and externally, in your life, in your clients' lives, is sort of the big contribution, I think, and is different from virtually any psychotherapy. Happens to be common wisdom in the spiritual world. Virtually every religious tradition, especially the esoteric branches, have a word for this, have practices to try and access it. I stumbled on a way to do it quickly, often, in people that, if you believe basic attachment theory, have no business with any of that kind of ego strain. So I make this statement that people gasp at frequently, which is that attachment theory got it wrong, which is blasphemy in our field. I've been attacked left and right for that. Attachment theory got a lot of things right, a lot of things I value about it. But this basic core belief that to have that inside, you had to get it from the outside. You had to get it from some external relationship, is just dead wrong. It's in there. It's our birthright. We come into the world with it. We work with kids down to age 3. They've got it. So this is the big deal. And when you know about it and you help your client access it, your job as a therapist becomes so much easier because you have a co-therapist that lives with your client and knows how to heal them much more than you do. Okay. So that's the self. Now, in the early days, I was hearing about these parts, and I was hearing about parts that were hurting or terrified or felt totally worthless, and it made sense to try and get to those and try and heal those. So I would do what I could to do that, and then found that my clients were having very negative reactions after some of those sessions. Had a client who immediately spiked 103 fever walking out the door almost. Another client got into a car accident after leaving my office and just said she didn't see the car. And at some point I began putting 2 and 2 together and figured out there's something I'm doing wrong that's related to these after effects. And then I got scared and thought, oh, this is a much more delicate ecology than I thought. I better just back off. And then I got curious, and instead I started asking what I was doing wrong. And what I learned is what I'm going to teach you, which is this kind of map of the territory. And what I learned was I was violating the rules that protective parts had of the system by going to these very vulnerable places without their permission. So, as a system thinker, I'm looking for these patterns, and the main pattern that's jumped out then and is stuck with as the main distinction among parts, the most important distinction, is between these very vulnerable ones and then the ones who protect them. So I'm going to teach you this little map, not so you impose it on your clients, but so that you don't do the damage to your clients that I did back then. So, protectors, and then these very vulnerable parts. I'm going to start with those vulnerable ones. So when you ever were humiliated or had some kind of trauma, or your parents yelled at you or any of that, you have these young childlike parts who before that event were delightful inner children who lent you lots of creativity and joy and innocence and spontaneity. But after the event, they're the ones who take that to heart the most. They're the sensitive parts that get hurt the most by those kinds of traumas. They take on the burdens of pain, emotional pain, shame, worthlessness, loneliness, desperation, and like that. And after they've been hurt, you don't want anything to do with them. Because you don't know they're just wounded inner children. You think, well, this is the memory of my pain and what happened to me, and I don't want to spend time with that. And at least in the United States, I don't know about Canada, everybody around you said, don't look back, just keep on, just let it go, you can't change what happened. So everybody around you talked you into exiling those emotions, sensations, memories, and beliefs. And unbeknownst to you, you wound up locking up your most precious inner qualities in the form of these hurt inner children that we call the exiles. Everybody's got them. Everybody in this room's got a bunch of exiles in some kind of inner basement or abyss, cyst. Once you get a bunch of exiles, the world becomes more dangerous because things that happen that are remotely similar can trigger them, and when they're triggered, they can explode out of whatever you've got them contained in and take over. Flames of emotion threaten to consume you, and other parts of you think you're going to die, or they think it's as bad as it was when it happened originally. And so we also have parts whose job it is to prevent that from ever happening. And some of them try to manage your life so that you don't get too close to anybody, or you don't get too distant from people you depend on, or you look perfect so no one rejects you, or you perform at a high level. And that's a big job. That's a lot of work to keep you respectable, to keep you from getting hurt again. So we call those the managers, and they're often working all the time. Some of them never sleep. And they often are the critics, these inner critics that we hate because they're so hard on us. But they're criticizing you just to try to get you to behave so you don't get hurt again, usually to look good. Or sometimes they're criticizing you to run down your confidence so you don't take any risks. But they're not just critics, there's also parts that are big caretakers and never let you take care of yourself. Parts that, are trying to please everybody. There are hypervigilant parts that are scanning. These are managers in the sense that they're trying to manage your life to preempt anything that might trigger those exiles. Despite all their work, we get triggered. The world has a way of breaking through those defenses and activating all that pain again, or that shame, or that terror. And again, when that happens, it's a big emergency. You can't stay there very long. So there's another set of parts whose job it is to immediately go into action, to get you higher than the flames, to douse them with some substance, to distract you until they burn themselves out. So we call these firefighters. And we've all got firefighters, The difference between, they're both protectors. Managers, again, are preemptive firefighters after an exile's been triggered. They're reactive, often explosive, damn the torpedoes. They don't care about the collateral damage to you, your body, or to your relationships. They're just going to get you away from that feeling right now, no matter what. And we've all got a kind of hierarchy of them. So if the first one doesn't work, we go to the next one. If that doesn't work, the next one. The top of that hierarchy for most everybody, which is a big topic this week. Anybody? Suicide. Yeah. And for most of us, it's very comforting to know we have that exit strategy. And here we come along as well-meaning therapists and say, I want you to sign this contract saying you're not going to kill yourself. And you wonder why your clients go crazy, because you just took away their safety net. So that's the map. Protectors, then two different classes of protector, manager, and firefighter, all of working hard to contain and protect exiles. And in most clients, self is nowhere to be found in the beginning because these protectors have been running their lives. They're like, if you're a family therapist, you know the term parentified children. Because they're young. Even the ones that seem so grown up and smart, usually they're at best teenage kids when you get to know them. So it's sort of like Lord of the Flies. Did you read that in high school? It's a bunch of little kids, some of whom had to be the warriors and take over, and some, like Piggy, were vulnerable and were exiled. Okay. So that was what? How did I do? Not bad. So let me pause here and gather any questions or reactions so far, especially for those of you this is new to. Yeah. The question is, why do these burdens stick to these vulnerable parts and drive them that way? I don't really know. I mean, part of it is because we don't unburden them in the moment. So at our annual conference this year, there's going to be a big plenary on bringing this to education. And we have 3 primary initiatives to do that. And my goal is to make it so that if a kid gets bullied, the teacher helps them find the part that got hurt and unburden it in the moment. So that you don't, see, trauma isn't inherently traumatizing. What's traumatizing is the impact it has on your inner system. I know I'm not answering your question, but I'll hopefully circle back to it. So what's traumatizing is it creates that map that I just described to you, where you lock up a bunch of parts and others have to take on these parental roles, and the self is no longer trusted by the parts because self didn't protect you. That's what's traumatizing, and the burdens these parts carry. And I think it's like a kid. You know, there are kids in a family where, you know, the parents are raging at each other, and this kid takes on the belief that it's his fault, or takes on the terror that he's going to lose his parents. Why did he take that on? Just because that's what he felt. Same with these parts. They take this stuff on based on what happened in the trauma, and they just kind of believe it now. It's their belief, or their extreme emotion now. It's the best I can do.
I feel like I've heard you answer this before, in terms of it's like if it wasn't, the person wasn't able to be held by an older parent type figure's self to get the perspective that it wasn't all true about them.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what, they don't have access to their own self to keep it from being a burden.
Yeah, if there isn't somebody, and this goes to attachment theory, to comfort them and say, no, it wasn't your fault, then they're likely to believe it was and hold on to that belief. But, yeah.
They attach to the belief because they need to attach to something, and there isn't the ability to get what they need in the relationship. So it's actually like they have a relationship with the belief.
Sometimes, like the protectors will take on burdens because they feel like they need this rage now to protect the person. So they become dependent on that, and they're reluctant to let it go. But why do exiles pick up burdens? It's because they, any kid who, kids take on the belief that I'm bad rather than my parents because it's safer for them in a way. They can control what they do, and it just becomes a burden. Yeah. So the question is, if I've got a 6-year-old client with lots of protectors, how quickly do I get past them? Is that right? As quickly as they'll let you. But no quicker. And that again was the lesson I learned. Now, because I bring a lot of self to my clients, because I've been doing this 30 years and I've done a lot of work with my exiles, a lot of work with my protectors. So maybe not with my wife, am I in self all the time? But with clients, I'm in self most all the time in a big way. And so clients immediately sense the safety of that, and their protectors relax. And I can do sessions, demo sessions, and where we go quite deep very quickly, but still with permission. So, and I'll always start with the protector. And again, this is the reason for the map. It's not to impose on your clients, it's so you know who are the protectors in the system, who are the exiles. I better start with the protectors before I go to the exiles. And we'll start there, and I'll do my spiel with protectors or ask the questions we ask. And because they trust that I know what I'm doing, and I could pull off what I'm selling, I'm basically a hope merchant, I call myself. So I'm saying to protectors, I get that you're really afraid to go to these places that you've locked up 30 years ago and you've said, I'll never go back to. I understand why you wouldn't want to open that door. You're the boss. We're not going to do it without your permission. But if you gave permission, we can go in there without being overwhelmed. We can get that childlike part that's stuck back in that time out of there, and we can unload all the feelings and beliefs you've been trying to contain. And you'll be able to relax and do something entirely different. What do you think? And if they believe me, which they tend to because I'm so confident, I say, oh, okay, I'll let you try it. And then we open the door. Now, other clients, been betrayed by therapists, been betrayed by their parents over and over. It takes many, many more sessions to build up that trust in me. And I just take as long as it takes. So it really varies. Yeah.
Could you say more about the parts being stuck in time?
Yeah. They are literally stuck in time. They literally, if I did an exercise now, which we don't have time for, but I often do, which I would have you find one of your protectors inside, and as part of the questions you would ask, I would have you ask it, how old do you think I am? Not how old is the part. How old does this part think you are? Most of you would get a single digit for an answer. They are stuck back there. They literally think you're still that age. And they literally think the world is still as dangerous as it was back then. Did you ask why that is, or did you just say?
No, that helps.
That helps? Okay. And updating them is a big relief. And I've had it many times where a client says, no, I'm 68, and the part says, no way. I don't believe you. And is totally shocked. And we have to get a newspaper and look at the date. But once they believe it, I mean, sometimes they say, I don't care how old you are, you're still an idiot. But most of the time, they're relieved to know that you're not a little kid and that you can handle more than they thought. So that's actually a common question now with protectors. How old do you think she is? No, she's not 5 years old. She can handle more than she could back then. You needed to do this when she was 5, and we honor you for it. You saved her life. But no, you don't have to do it now. Anything else so far? Yeah.
It's all wonderful.
Yeah.
We can sue them.
Yeah, so this is important in working with couples, and we'll be talking about it more this afternoon. But that's what we call creating a U-turn in their focus, because their focus is on this out here. They're either on their partner or on the child protection people or the kid. And how do you get them to look inside at their parts? And how, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll spend some time on that this afternoon. Anything else? Okay, so again, I'm very briefly going to talk about how you change all this, and then go to this video, I think. So, as I said, we want to start, well, client comes in, tells me about their problem. First session, I might do the same kind of history you do. My history, I'm particularly interested in, are there any dangerous firefighters I need to know about? So I'm asking questions about suicide attempts and so on, things like that. Because if there are, I want to get to those as soon as possible. Because as long as you don't get to them, they lurk like bombs ready to go off, and it govern how much you can actually do with the inner system. But I'm taking history, and then at some point I'm asking about the problem and their inner experience of the problem, which is related to that U-turn thing. So when this happens, when your wife says this to you, what happens inside of you? What do you feel? What do you say to yourself? Oh, so one part of you gets really angry and wants to yell at her, is that right? Yeah, that's right. Oh, and then another part of you feels really young and scared. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Like she's going to leave you. Okay. So I'm just reflecting back the way you learned to, graduate school, what my client is saying, but I'm adding the phrase, so one part of you and another part. And clients don't say, what are you talking about? Because everybody in this room, probably today or yesterday, said something about a part. One part is happy to be here, another part of you would rather be in bed. Everybody uses this language. That's why I use it. It didn't get me very far in academia. It's not the best word because it implies a kind of machine kind of thing. But it's the most common word. Everybody uses it. Everybody's safe with that. Except for people who don't like it, which is not very many. So I'm introducing that idea, people saying, yeah, that's right. At some point I'll say, is there one of these we've identified that you would like to change or want to get to know better or have more control over? They pick that one. If it seems like that's an exile, I'll say, we'll get to that, but first I want to talk to the parts that don't want us to go there for whatever reason. So I'm always, again, trying to start with protectors. So we go to that. Initial steps, pretty simple. Focus on it, find it in your body, around your body. That kind of grounds the work. It gives you a place for your client to focus on as they talk to the part and focus on to get answers from. Most clients can do that pretty readily. Then this question, how do you feel toward this part, is kind of a magic question, because in answering that, they're telling you how much self is present relative to this part, or how much other parts that are polarized with it, don't like it, fear it, are actually answering the question. So they say they hate it, they want to get rid of it. I'll say some version of, that makes sense because it's causing you a lot of trouble. But our goal is just to get to know it now. We're not going to let it take over more. We're just going to get to know it and maybe help it, not have to do this. And if we hate it, that's not going to go well. So see if the one who hates it is willing to give us a little space so you can just be curious and get to know it. It's just a kind of spiel. Most of the time, okay. How do you feel toward it now? Curious, why is it calling me? Why is it doing this to me? Tone of voice, facial expression. Seems like we got what we call the critical mass of self. There's enough self that the part will respond whereas before wouldn't, because it was being attacked or client was too afraid. So ask it. Ask it why it does this, or what's it afraid would happen if it didn't do this, or whatever it wants you to know about itself. Answer comes. Now often it comes from some thinking part, especially in Boston where I live. So I'm constantly getting these thinking parts to step out. Because people have been in traditional therapy and the thinking parts answered the questions. So they think that's what they're supposed to be. In therapy, I'd come in, I'd give you the answers. So get that thinking part to step back, focus again on this one in your body, and wait for the answer to come from that place in your body. And just be patient. If nothing comes, that's okay. So they wait, and now they hear something that sounds like it's from the part. So we work with protector to the point where it conveys what it's protecting. And the big question that gets you there is ask the part what it's afraid would happen if it didn't do this job. And in answering that, usually you'll hear about what it protects or what it's polarized with. So if I'm working with a suicidal part, ask the part what it's afraid would happen if it didn't kill you. You can usually get one of two answers to that. Guesses?
Continue to suffer.
You'll continue to suffer, is the most common answer. Or she's evil and she deserves to die. Not nearly as common, but it happens. The first one, the suicidal protector is telling you about the exiles it protects and how much suffering they carry and how much they drive her crazy. The second one is usually talking about some part it hates that did something vile and is afraid it's going to do it again. So it's polarized with that part. Does it sound right? So my response is, makes sense you would want to kill her. If we could heal those exiles, if we could heal the pain, we could go to them, heal that pain, would you still have to kill her? No, but I don't think you can do that. It's like, duh, if I thought you could do that, I wouldn't be trying to kill her. Would you give me a chance to show you that we can? I guarantee we can, if you just give me the chance. Worked with highly, highly suicidal patients for 20 years, basically. Nobody killed themselves. Nobody even attempted. The biggest antidote to suicide is hope. When you fight the suicidal part, it will kick your ass. If you honor it and give it some hope, it doesn't want to die. It knows it's going down with the ship. Does this make sense? So that's the negotiation with protectors, virtually any protector. If you give us permission, we can go in there, relieve whatever you're reacting to, so you're freed up to do something entirely different. What would you like to do instead? If you could do anything else inside, you'd be amazed that most of the time, the answer is the exact opposite that the part's been doing. The critic wants to be your cheerleader, the one who makes you hide wants to get you out there, so on and so on. So my pitch is, give us permission and we can free you up to do that. We'll liberate you from this role that you hate. Most of them hate their roles. They just don't think it's safe to leave them. So, to do it quickly, it's hard in the beginning because you don't have this confidence that I have. You got to borrow some. So anyway, that's the pitch. The protector, it gives us permission or not. If it doesn't give us permission, we don't go. If it doesn't give us permission, we just stay with it. Keep working with it. Keep loving it up. Keep honoring it. Keep pitching to it. At some point, it gets worn down and it gives us permission.